Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Greater Good. This is a really exciting adventure in my life that my board at the San Diego Harbor Police Foundation graciously allows me to do. And every time I have just new and more interesting guests, which makes me want to continue doing it. Today is no exception. Today I've got a remarkable man. His name's Rudy Shappee, and he's here to talk about one of the most iconoclastic uh, ships in the world that's moored here permanently in San Diego at the port. Hi, Rudy.
Hi, good to see you.
Likewise, thank you so much for coming all the way over here on Coronado to Attorney King Studios with producer Sarah, marvelous producer Sarah. So I mean, who doesn't want to know more about the ship? I mean, when you say the ship in San Diego, it could be a lot of things. But for those of us who live here or who travel great distances to come and visit the Midway, I mean, it's such a remarkable story on how it got here, and you have been a part of it all. But before we start on that, I have a question. This is really important. Tell me about the ghosts on the ship.
Oh dear. Yes, there are many. As a matter of fact, my office is located where there's been activity in the corner of my office. We just did a ghost tour, behind the scenes ghost tour, where we had 14 docents stationed at different places around the ship, telling stories of action in different locations. My location was in the educational department, and we had from water being turned on and off in the bathrooms to an actual appearance of a ghost looking around the corner of a through a door at a person who was working in a room. So yes, we've had it's been known to be pretty active.
That's remarkable.
Not all the crew left.
and yeah, of course, you really can't document that very well, but I think people love those stories. It's like the Hotel Del. They have the couple of rooms there that people want to book years in advance to
Yes.
so they get a sense of what that is. But when you think about the magnitude of the USS Midway, I mean, how big is that ship?
Well, she's 1,000 feet long, weighing in at 169,000 tons.
Oh my gosh.
And most people ask us, is it floating?
Uh-huh.
And it is floating. She's a big ship. As a matter of fact, the newer aircraft carriers across the bay are only just a few feet longer, although they're weighing in at higher tonnage, and have a larger crew. But she's about the standard size of an aircraft carrier that you'll see in the fleet today.
Yeah. So you're in the process, or maybe recently completed, a big project to remove the propellers. Is that accurate?
Yes. Before they moved the ship into its berth on Navy Pier, next to Navy Pier, they were supposed to dredge deep enough and close enough to the quay wall for us to fit. And that worked until we had a minus tide. When we have our spring minus tides, she goes aground,
right,
in stern with the rudders and the propellers. So when that happens, it forces pressure up into the stern of the ship,
right,
and actually causes the ship to bend. So that action is detrimental to the care and feeding of a long-term museum. So we had to have that cut off. And of course, to do that, we had to go to the Navy to get their approval first. And then First, we looked at taking off the propeller, two of the propellers, and cutting off the bottoms of the rudders. But then the Navy said, no, just take off what you need to take off on the propellers and the bottoms of the rudders. So they're in the process of completing that right now.
So they're not removing the propellers of the rudder; they're just going to trim them down a bit.
They have trimmed them. I've seen the portions that they brought up by crane.
Well, you know this, but for our audience, they don't know this. But the San Diego Harbor Police, Port of San Diego Harbor Police dive team, they do a lot of training on your ship, don't they?
Absolutely, and the SEALs do a lot of training. We've had all kinds of police departments. As a matter of fact, when we got this ship in 2003, the inside of it was covered with paintball markings
Oh, no.
because the sheriff's department, the Washington Sheriff's Department, the police department, state police, all these people had used it to run trainings on, and they'd used paintball. So
Oh,
part
my
of
gosh.
restoring the ship was getting all that paint off of the bulkheads around all the doors where people were shooting each other.
Oh my gosh. Now, I heard a rumor that you actually were there when they moved the ship. You went to its original or its former birthing spot and you brought it here. Is that
That's not quite true. She was birthed in Bremerton, Washington.
okay?
And when we got this ship, they hired an engineer, Pete Clayton, and he went up and hired a crew. They had to clean the ship before they could move it because it had been sitting up there for 12 years and was covered with bird droppings, and it was rusty, and it had tons of garbage all over the hangar deck. The Navy had used it as a storage place, like a Dempsey dumpster.
Oh my!
Rather than sending stuff to landfill, they just put chains and K-Park life vests and broken boats and all that stuff. All that had to be removed by hand because the pier was so unstable that they couldn't move tractors up and down or so. So they removed 9,000 bags of garbage from the ship, all by hand.
Oh my gosh.
Walking it all the way down the pier and putting it in Dempsey dumpsters, plus peeling all the bird droppings off the deck and everything. So it took them 2 months just to get it ready so that they could tow it to Alameda. I saw the ship first in Alameda.
Okay.
When they were painting it, and they had to paint it by hand because the EPA wouldn't let them use spray paint.
Oh my
so
gosh.
everything was rollers on a stick, up at
like
sides
the
of
old
the
days.
fuselage. Yeah, and that took them 2 months to get through that. So it's quite a process.
I had an encounter with Alan Yuki.
Oh yes.
And it was completely unrelated to the ship. He actually bought a large wine cooler that I had for sale, and I said, "Are you Alan Yuki? With the Midway?" And he can go, "Yeah." So he told me some wonderful little tidbits, stories, and whatnot. But you, sir, are the master of tidbits and stories about this ship. I mean, you are the chief docent. And so for my listeners who don't know what that means, that these are subject matter experts that are stationed throughout the ship, this huge 1,000-foot long, beautiful former battleship aircraft carrier. And so they can answer, a good amount of the questions that people ask about what is this called, or what do they use that for? So that's the role of a docent. I had this very interesting opportunity to get a private tour with your chief engineer.
Oh yes, Lynn.
Yes,
Santiago.
Wonderful man. But oh my gosh, talk about hidden little gems throughout that ship, things that I guess the normal people never get to see or hear about. Yeah. But it was a remarkable tour. So in all of your years, and you've been on board the ship since 2002, is that correct?
Well, the ship wasn't here yet. The ship didn't arrive until 2004.
Okay.
But I was working at North Island restoring aircraft before that, waiting for the ship to come. So we would have some airplanes on the flight deck when we finally opened. So
got it.
I was over there for 2 years.
Wow. So what's the most, I don't know, I hate to use the word interesting. What's the most remarkable thing that you've learned about the Midway in the 22, almost 23 years?
I think the most important thing was in 2015, we built a theater. Our guests had a problem with the name of the ship, the USS Midway. And most of them thought it fought in the Battle of Midway in 1942. And of course, it wasn't commissioned until 1945. So that was an impossibility. So we always were struggling with that name and the connection. So we decided that we would build a theater and we would tell the story of the Battle of Midway and the sacrifices of the young men who fought in that battle. And then at the end of it, we'd say the ship was named after that battle.
Got it.
Here's the connections. So that process was 5.5 years, $9 million. to design, find the story, design it. But I think the most important thing I learned was the young boys who fought in that battle were untrained, unequipped. They were, and they knew they were going into the darkness.
Mm.
They knew, and
Wow.
as I worked the stories, I even went to Pensacola and got the flight records and the high school records and college records of the kids who lost their lives in Torpedo Squadron 8. So I had pictures of them,
Oh my
personal
goodness.
pictures, and their families and so on. So I really had a personal connection with those young men who
I'll bet.
turned away the Japanese in the Pacific
Yeah.
through their sacrifice. And that really, really got to my heart
I can imagine.
and has stayed with me throughout. And that's expanded into the lives of the 227,000 men who have served on that ship,
No
of
way.
whom over 250 had died aboard. You know, I'd get paid
Wow.
the ultimate price for our freedom. So,
Yeah.
so I have a very close personal connection to the people you don't see on the ship, but
Wow.
all who made the ship the magic that it is.
How wonderful.
You know,
Now you, sir, you served in the Navy for quite a while.
20 years.
Came from enlisted through up to a warrant officer. Had a remarkable history in the military. You never served on the Midway, I'm assuming.
No, I crossed deck tour once when we were being relieved by her after Yankee Station tour. So we were transferring assets aboard. I was in a helicopter just moving equipment from one ship to the other, but never stayed overnight.
Yeah. So I can imagine your history and training being in the Navy as long as you were has helped you quite a bit in terms of the restoration and maintenance and care, which, by the way, is a huge job.
Yes, it
That
is.
thing
Yes, it
is, you know, it's like the Golden Gate Bridge. They never stop working
No,
on it.
we can't. We can't. We have divers who are underwater cleaning the hull, and they have to do that 2 or 3 times a year and have to do it over and over and over again because, of course, algae is growing.
Sure.
And the biggest problem ship museums have in the world is that they're sinking because they can't afford to take care of the hull.
Right.
And so that project is multi-million-dollar project just to keep us afloat for the next 50 years.
Wow.
So, and yes, my history in the Navy helped an awful lot because I served on 3 aircraft carriers during my career. That isn't all I did, but I was aboard 3 aircraft carriers for extended periods of time. And of the original people who came into the ship, there were very few of us who had a carrier experience.
Right.
And there were very few of us who were in aviation, who knew the aviation story. So in restoring the ship and building the exhibits, I was kind of the go-to guy to say, this is what happened in this space. This is what we're going to recreate here in this place. This is this part of the story, and then we'll move on to the next place. And that covered a period of 16 years of building the exhibitry and telling the story to the guests who come aboard and see it all in about 4.5 hours.
So we have an expression around here, Sarah and I, and it's something to do with so-and-so is a really big deal. And you, sir, from the stories I've heard you tell and others tell, you are a big deal. I mean, without your knowledge, expertise, and passion, you know, that ship wouldn't be what it is today.
Yeah, but someone else would have been able to do it. The big deal that we're missing are the over 800 volunteers who built those exhibits. When we were building exhibits, we had 2 paid people. Everyone else was a volunteer, including myself. So that's the big story, is that 800 people, and actually they run the ship. They open it in the morning, they close it at night. Anything except handling money is all done by volunteers.
Right.
And so without that cadre, we would still be back trying to figure out how to clean the ship.
Right.
Because it was all done by them.
Right.
And it's a really important part of our business model.
Yeah.
Is that these people, unpaid people, who are celebrated every year. As a matter of fact, tomorrow we're having a big holiday party at the Marriott to celebrate them.
Yeah.
So they're the real story. There's individuals, but the real story is those people. I think there are a number of us who have over 20,000 hours of volunteer time aboard that ship.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And that's a signature element of people that are a big deal.
Yeah,
That
yes, it is.
they
Over and
they
above.
deflect the praise on
Oh,
themselves, and they push it off to the people that deserve it just as much as they do. So yeah, thank you for your service. The USS Midway is, by my estimation, the second largest uh, entertainment museum piece in San Diego County, including the San Diego Zoo and the Safari Park. Is that?
yeah. As far as Yelp is concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yelp.
we're really very, very popular, and it's because of our storytellers.
Right.
It's because you can go to a museum and you see docents standing around with earbuds and ties and daring you to touch anything, versus us who are always in their face saying, "Where are you going to? Can I help you? Let me tell you about it." And until they have to throw us off the ship at 5 o'clock. But yeah, it's the most visited ship museum in the world.
I'll be darned.
Most visited.
Oh my gosh.
And that includes places like the Arizona, which deserves much more than what the Midway
Historically
has,
speaking.
Yeah.
Right.
And our CEO was elected president of the International Ship Museums Association.
Admiral Mack.
Admiral Mack. God bless him.
Yeah. Wonderful leader. Big shoes to fill there.
Yes.
For our listeners' benefit, the longtime serving CEO of the ship, which is a huge job, is retiring here shortly. So there's a search out there right now. You should apply for the job.
No. Louise, that's my wife. Cut this portion out of the podcast.
She did. She said, "If you
dare,
there we will have words. There will be blood.
There'll be more than words."
Yeah. She's a smart woman.
Yeah.
Although, I was wondering. Actually, somebody said I should apply for the job, and I said, "Well, I'm not a Navy person. I was an Army guy." But you definitely need someone who has that salt water in their blood to be able to manage and create the atmosphere. And I mean, you go on board the ship, and you're in the Navy. I mean, there's just no question about it.
The bosun's calls are coming over the 1MC, telling us to prepare to get underway or start flight operations or that sort of thing. So they hear that as well as see and feel. Yes.
Yeah, you create that imagery in people's minds, and that brings them into the reality of that ship. So when I had that special tour with your chief engineer, he took me down into the war room, and compared to what ships today look like, I mean, that was like arcane. I mean, you might as well be throwing beanbags at people.
Well, not quite. We did have a few electronic devices that we could use, yes. But the Combat Information Center for the ship took us 9.5 years to restore.
Is that
9.5 years to get? You see, when the ships are put into mothballs or in a reserve fleet, they use them as parts bins for the active ships.
Right.
So if you need a piece of equipment, you don't buy it new. You go to an older ship and take it out and use it.
Sure.
So when we got the ship, we had rooms that were filled with nothing except wires hanging from the overheads.
Oh no!
And that's the story that we were left with. And we only through researching old cruise books and ships' drawings and so on were able to finally recreate those rooms. And then we had to go to Bremerton every summer. They would open up a ship for us. We had to have a list of the parts that we wanted. They would go up and we could have that removed and shipped back at our own expenses, and then loaded aboard and installed. And in many cases, the equipment was too large to go into the compartment. So we had to cut it up into pieces and put it in a compartment and then put it back together again. So it didn't look like it. So it was a really 9.5 years to recreate these 5 rooms up there to make them look like they actually work.
Yeah.
And we encourage everyone to throw every switch, turn every knob. We want you to touch everything.
Right.
We've got extra knobs, extra switches. Don't worry about a thing.
Yeah.
So the kids are all at the consoles, moving things around, that sort of thing. So it's really a involved experience for everyone.
Yeah, really. It's very alive. In fact, the reason I took that tour was our foundation has adopted Perkins K-8 school in the Barrio Logan. And one of our programs that we're going to be initiating towards the end of this year, well, actually 2023, I'm sorry, is called Career Pathways. And one of the career pathways that your chief engineer and I were designing and working on is to bring those middle school kids, 7th and 8th graders, on board the ship and get them hands-on experience in propulsion and generating electricity and things that make a monster ship like that actually operate.
Work, yes.
As opposed to just taking a tour and saying, this used to do that or that used to do this. We want them to get a real life experience so that they have a visualization, both tactile and emotional, about what opportunities there are for young, 7th and 8th graders coming out of a very disadvantaged, environment. Perkins K-8 school has a 40% homelessness ratio there. They're food insecure. They have a lot of issues. I mean, they check a lot of boxes, that you don't want to have to check. And so the Midway is going to be a huge part of that Career Pathways program. And thanks to Admiral Mack and Dan Benjamin, yourself, and Laura White, and other really important people on board the ship, we're going to be able to do that program for these kids.
We've been doing that for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
For the K-8 kids, when we very began the ship, because I taught for 20 years after I had retired from the military. Max said, "You're the educator, build me an education program." So I went into the textbooks we were thinking history,
right?
History, because he went to Vietnam three or four times. So we'll tell that story. But really, in the perspective of what's being taught in schools now, we filled maybe a page and a half of a history book.
Right.
So history was not where we were going to make our impact with kids.
Right.
And one day I was walking down the hangar deck, and I recalled the movie with Charlie Chaplin called Modern Times. And he's working on an assembly line. It's a no sound movie. He's working on an assembly line. He gets behind, he starts leaning over, and he gets grabbed by the assembly line and goes through this giant machine. And then they spits him out the other side. And I said, my gosh, I'm walking through one of the largest machines in the world,
right.
And I'm looking at history. I should be looking at science and math and that sort of thing. So
right.
we built a program that is, and I also was a vice principal for a while.
I read that.
And when the teachers would ask me for money to go on field trips, I'd say, "Where are you going? What are you going to do?" And they'd tell me where they're going, what they're going to do. And I'd say, "Well, you can do that in the classroom. So you go.
You don't get to go.
So we only have so much money. Let's get serious." So when we designed the programs on the Midway, everything that kids came to do had to be done to accomplish their grade level qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
And everything had to be done that could not be done in the classroom.
Right.
Okay. So if you're going to study electricity, I know in the classroom that they have little pegboards that you can make a little electrical circuit and that sort of thing.
Sure.
But on the Midway, after you do that, you go down to the electrical generation system, through the switchboards,
mm-hmm.
follow the wires around through the ship, and look at all the systems that the electrical system is operating.
Yeah.
Or if you're doing weather, you're going to go up on the flight deck with a weather meter and do dew point and temperature and those sort of things. So you're predicting the weather. So everything has a practical application. And because it's so successful, we've expanded it now down to grade 2. We have teachers who come aboard, bring their kids in grade 2. And when the kids get to grade 3, they come back. In grade 4, they come back. In grade 5, they come back, because every year it's a different part of their education that we're helping their teachers
building foundations.
Yeah. So it's a win-win for the kids. And actually, by about the third time they come aboard, they're not overawed by the side of the ship, and the learning quotient goes up.
Right.
Because they're able to focus more on what we're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do you gather the metrics on what happens to some of those students? I mean, let's say you started in the 3rd grade and you phase out at grade 8. Do you ever go back and measure how many of those students pursued a career in something they may have been jarred into their brains on the Midway?
No, we haven't. But what we do, the metric that we depend upon most is the responses by the students when they write us thank you letters
Oh, right.
and tell us what they learned
Yeah.
and how they learned it, and the teachers thanking us for helping the kids grasp this concept
Right.
so that they can carry away with it, but not long term. No, we haven't done it.
Be interesting.
Yes, yes. Something else to do.
There you go. You're not retired. You're still above ground, Rudy. So I may have found a new project
There
for
you
you. We'll get you a grant, sponsored by UCSD or something like that, and get you back into the education world. So what's your prognosis? How much longer are you going to stay on the ship? What's going on with you?
My plan is to be found on the ship. So no short-term goals at all.
I see. So I watched Yellowstone last night. Sarah and we love Yellowstone, and there's this old cowboy, and they're going out. They're going to do a roundup, a branding, and so he goes off with Kevin Costner, and they're laying down for the night next to an old tree, and the older gentleman, he passes, and at night, on sleeping on a saddle under the stars, and the whole show, part of the show just centers on this whole element that this is a man who loved what he did, and he was the most happy and content when he was out with his horse or taking care of cows. And so is that what's going to happen to you?
That's exactly what's going to happen to me. Probably I won't be asleep, but I'll probably, have my head will be down on my computer, and
I don't. Yeah. Speaking of heads,
the screen will be dark.
you walk around that ship and you have to watch your head. I mean, I'm not very tall. My gosh.
Yeah.
I know.
The most treated injury aboard ship was head laceration.
Oh yeah. Well, Dan Bentema has permanent scars. He's
tall.
Dan? He's like 6'2" or something like that, maybe 6'3". So yeah, and now he hunches over. He can't stand up straight because he's been on board the ship. Yeah. Well, that's great. So you have stories, I know, for sure. But I really like to focus on are the things that you've observed other people have garnered from being on board the ship. You've got 800 volunteers, you've got docents, you have some paid staff, people that have lived and worked in that environment before. Is there a particular person that comes to mind that just like, boy, did they come away a better person?
Yes.
Or
yes. As a matter of fact, I just read her letter again a couple of days ago. We received a letter in about, I guess, 16 or 17, written by a woman from Northern California, Northern Central, who's a professional, who said that she came aboard the ship with her husband reluctantly, because the last thing in the world she ever wanted to do was go aboard a weapon of war or spend any time on it.
Right.
But he was a guy, and he wanted to see the nuts and bolts, and he wanted to see the airplanes and everything. So she came aboard, and she received a free self-guided tour device that relates stories, not only about where you are and what happened here, but by people who actually worked there, and their stories of the work they did. And she started listening to these and learning of the personal relationship that all these, there were 4,500 men on that ship at a time, and their interrelationships that they had, and the support that they had, and the support that they gave one another to accomplish their missions. And then she was in a space that was on a guided tour, and the docent asked, did anyone here serve aboard the Midway? And one old fella raised his hand, and she says, I couldn't get my eyes off of him. The rest of the time we were in that room, I couldn't stop looking at him because he was must have been well into his 80s. And here's a person who did the stuff of which this ship is made.
Wow.
This is part of the magic right here. So she left that day and wrote us a very kind letter thanking us for allowing her to learn that it just wasn't about war. It was about humanity,
right,
and about supporting one another. And it's a very kind letter, and we really cherish it.
Before we started the show, for my listeners' benefit, Rudy and I were talking about life, just sort of at a casual, getting to know each other arena. And I said, this is really all we have, our stories. Because, like you say, Rudy, it allows us to bring out the humanity, which is so desperately required in order to live and end your life peacefully. And so, yeah, sure, the Midway was a vessel that created death and carnage around the world and served its purpose in protecting America and our allies. But it's really about the people that were on board that ship that made the difference.
And the humanitarian missions. There were a number of humanitarian missions where they provided water to people in Africa who had just had experienced an earthquake and they had no water. To evacuation of Saigon.
Right.
All those refugees that came out and were found solace aboard the ship. So there's another part. It's not just about war.
No.
What we've learned is it's about people doing things. And war was just a part of it.
Well, that's an excellent point because I served myself in the Army. And when I served in the Army, we did a lot of that sort of stuff. We were reaching out into villages, into remote areas in the Philippines and
yes,
Southeast Asia, Europe, and just, all around the world. And I don't think people really realize that the military's primary function is not war. It's really to deter war. And along with that, there's that building of relationships. So when a naval vessel shows up in a foreign country, it's not showing off how big and shiny our weapons are. It's really about having the sailors or the Marines or the Army people or Air Force, Coast Guard people get off board that ship and get to know Americans. And
the sailors on that ship painted a lot of orphanages.
Yeah.
And they gave a lot of books and equipment to people. I remember my first cruise to Vietnam. We provided treadle sewing machines to the people in the villages so they could have sewing machines. So a lot of good work like that.
Well, Rudy, I want to thank you so much for taking time today to spend with me and our listeners. I learned a lot, and hopefully I'll keep learning in my life. That's kind of the beauty of it. Sounds like you're a lifelong learner yourself. And I want to let our listeners know that please go on board the Midway. I mean, it's a magnificent museum. It's got so much history to tell. I mean, everybody's thinking about Top Gun and all these, jets and all that good stuff. Well, this is sort of the genesis of all of that electronic wizardry and amazing feats of aerobatics and ship maneuvering and all that good stuff. So thank you so much, Rudy, for coming. It's been a real pleasure. I want to thank my sponsor, San Diego Harbor Police Foundation. I want everybody to look forward to my next podcast. Sarah has a list. I'm not sure who it is, but it'll be interesting. Thank you very much.
You're certainly welcome.